Hey guys, so we are on the road again this week. So I'm sorry I am a little late getting everything set up, so please bear with me just a minute. It's just taken a bit to get everything pulled up. And click on that and say, yes, this was me. I don't know why it thinks that Hartford is in California, but we'll go with that, I suppose. So we're going to try to find our story. And, okay, so let's see what happened with this. Sorry guys, I am trying to figure out, okay, that's where we were last time. So I'm going to minimize this so I can have Facebook open here as well. And no, just let me have this. Thank you. And see what you guys are saying. See who's here. See who's hanging out. I hope it's a lot of you again today. I was super jazzed to see all of you last Saturday. Okay, so we'll make this a little smaller. I'm going to make this quite a bit smaller because I just need to see you guys. So we're going to do that, and we're going to go here. And, oh, no, that is not me logged in. That is still Charles logged in. So we're going to give it just a minute. Actually, I think what I can do is just go to, can I go to today's? And see what is happening? No. Can we go? Let's just search me. How about it? And there's me. And I love that it's going to show that Charles is watching because that cracks me up. And I am let's, you know what, let's actually turn off the speaker on this so we don't have the echo. La 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 la. I don't know. Okay, so I'm going to start reading while I play, so I'm sorry if we are a little bit distracted. But yeah, we actually kind of didn't finish part 2 because it got a little bit long last week. So we've gotten to the point where Mina has read Jonathan's letter and is kind of freaking out. So yeah, we're going to start after her swoon and faint and being taken upstairs. So yeah, let's do this. And ta-da. And ta-da. Let's see what is happening. That is not working. Oh, I will go up to the discussion and see what you guys are saying. I know Cheryl is here, and I can see myself now. Hi, Cheryl. Got a little hi, sweetheart from her. I love when you guys are here. So we're going to start in then. I just realized that this is going to be like a weird angle. So we'll do just a little tweaking, and we're going to switch you over here and you over here and hope that, oh, I'm pushing buttons with my thing. Sorry, guys. Yeah, let's get this kind of sorted out if we can. Maybe you need to go up here. And this tripod is like the coolest thing with these little adjustable arms. So let's see if we can't make this. Yeah, I know we're in a bedroom, but we're trying to be where it is quiet and not super windy, which is it is outside today. So I know you guys are actually like a couple minutes behind what I'm seeing. So I apologize for that too. But we are going to get started. And yeah, we'll just continue. At 8 a.m., Seward found the professor in the kitchen, intently studying the Westminster Gazette over a cup of tea. He poured himself a cup and sat down. After a moment, impatient for the elder's attention, he reflected aloud about the strange behavior of Mrs. Harker, which he had reported to the professor the previous night, as if he were resuming a conversation left off a minute ago. We have both seen this type of self-delusion before, though it is unusual that it originates in the marks upon a page made by a lunatic. It is not surprising when you consider the stress put upon that poor woman by the loss of her father and her best friend almost at the same time, and the unknown whereabouts of her husband. "So you are quick to dismiss it as hallucination, my young friend," said the professor without lifting his eyes from the newspaper. "Either that, or she is misinterpreting what the shorthand says, if it is shorthand, reading into innocuous phrases, signals, and clues the support which she so desperately wishes to believe, that her husband is alive and well. Remarkable." Van Helsing removed his glasses and put down the paper. "You must have her put down a complete transcript of the collected notes of Mr. Renfield as soon as Madame is up to it. If nothing else, it may help unravel the mystery of your prized patient. But for now, another task is at hand, concerning the corpse of Miss Lucy. Before night, I want you to bring me a set of post-mortem knives." "Must we make an autopsy?" "Yes and no. I want to operate, but not what you think. Let me tell you now, but not a word to another. I want to cut off her head and take out her heart. Ah, you are a surgeon, and so shocked. You, whom I've seen with no tremble of hand or heart, do operations of life and death that make the rest shudder. Oh, but I must not forget, my dear friend John, that you loved her, and I have not forgotten it, for it is I that shall operate, and you must not help. When she is coffined ready for tomorrow, you and I shall come when all sleep. We shall unscrew the coffin lid, and shall do our operation, and then replace all, so that none know save we alone." "But why do it at all? The girl is dead. Why mutilate her poor body without need? And if there is no necessity for a post-mortem and nothing to gain by it, no good to her, to us, to science, to human knowledge, why do it? Without such it is monstrous. I cannot permit it." For answer, Van Helsing put his hand on the young doctor's shoulder and said, with infinite tenderness, "Friend John, I pity your poor bleeding heart, and I love you the more because it does so bleed. If I could, I would take on myself the burden that you do bear. But to your authority must I bow. If faith in me you will not have, perhaps I am wrong. I hope I am wrong. And we shall be blessed that which I seek to prevent will never come to pass. But I fear there are strange and terrible days before us." A week after Lucy's interment, Dr. Seward took Mina with him to visit poor Mrs. Westenra, after which he had hoped to arrange for her going back to Exeter, where he believed daily tasks in her own home would benefit her mental state. Upon seeing Lucy's mother in such frail spirits, however, Mina decided to remain and keep her company for a few days. It would provide a strange comfort to herself as well, to spend time in the home where the spirit of her long friendship with Lucy yet resided, and far from the neighborhood of lunatics. After reassuring Mina that her quarters at his building would remain available for her use, the doctor returned home, and was standing at his own gate under a cold mist, when once more he heard yelling from Renfield's room. The poor wretch was doubtless torturing himself, after the manner of the insane, with needless thoughts of pain. Then there was the sound of a struggle, and he knew that the attendants were dealing with him. The mist was spreading, and was lying thick against the east wall, as though it were stealing up to the windows. It was a shock to Seward to turn from the wonderful smoky beauty of sunset over Whitby Harbor, and to realize all the grim sternness of his own cold stone building, with its wealth of breathing misery, and his own desolate heart to endure it all. At about 5:30, Seward was undressing in his own room, with a premonitory tap at the door. Van Helsing entered and thrust the Westminster Gazette into his hands. "What do you think of that?" he asked as he more or less flopped into a chair and wiped his forehead. Seward sat on his bed and looked over the paper, not knowing what it meant, but the professor took it from him and read aloud a paragraph with the headline, "The Hampstead Horror." "We have just received intelligence that another child was discovered late in the morning under a furze bush at the less frequented side of Hampstead Heath. It had the same tiny wounds in the throat as had been noticed in other cases. It was weak and emaciated, and told a similar story of being lured away by the Bloofer lady." "And what do you make of it?" the professor repeated. "It is like poor Lucy's." "You think, then, that those so small holes in the children's throats were made by the same that made the holes in Miss Lucy?" "I suppose so." Van Helsing said solemnly, "Then you are wrong. Oh, would it were so, but alas, no, it is worse. Far, far worse." "In God's name, Professor, what do you mean?" Van Helsing covered his face with his hands as he spoke. "They were made by Miss Lucy." For a while, sheer anger mastered Seward. It was as if the professor had, during her life, struck Lucy on the face. Seward rose up as he said to him, "Dr. Van Helsing, are you mad?" "Would I were," he said. "Madness were easy to bear compared with truth like this. Oh, my friend, I do not expect you should believe so sad a concrete truth, and of such a one as Miss Lucy. Tonight I go to prove it. Dare you come with me?" This staggered Seward. The professor saw his hesitation and spoke. "Come, I tell you what I propose. First, that we go off now and see that child in the hospital. Dr. Vincent of the North Hospital, where the papers say the child is a friend of mine, and I think of yours since you were in class at Amsterdam. He will let 2 scientists see his case, if he will not let 2 friends. We shall tell him nothing, but only that we wish to learn, and then—" "And then?" Van Helsing took a key from his pocket and held it up. "And then we spend the night, you and I, in the churchyard where Lucy lies. This is the key that locked the tomb." His pupil's heart sank within him, for he felt that there was some fearful ordeal before them. He could do nothing, however, so he plucked up what heart he could and said that they had better hasten, as the afternoon was passing. They found the child awake. It had had a sleep and taken some food, and altogether was going on well. Dr. Vincent took the bandage from its throat and showed them the punctures. There was no mistaking the similarity to those which had been on Lucy's throat. They were smaller, and the edges looked fresher. That was all. Vincent attributed them to a bite of some animal, perhaps a rat, but it was inclined to think that it was one of the bats which are so numerous on the northern heights of London. The visit to the hospital took more time than they had reckoned on, and the sun had dipped before they came out. When Van Helsing saw how dark it was, he said, "It is more late than I thought. Come, let us seek somewhere that we may eat, and then we shall go on our way." They dined at Jack Straw's castle, along with a little crowd of bicyclists and others who were genially noisy. About 10 o'clock they started from the inn. It was then very dark, and the scattered lamps made the darkness greater when they were once outside their individual radius. The professor had noted the road they were to go on, and he went on unhesitatingly, but Seward was in quite a mix-up as to locality. As they went further, they met fewer and fewer people. At last they reached the wall of the churchyard, which they climbed over. With some little difficulty they found the Westenra tomb. The professor took the key, opened the creaky door, and standing back politely, but quite unconsciously, motioned his student to precede him. There was a delicious irony in the offer, in the courtliness of giving preference on such a ghastly occasion. The professor followed quickly and cautiously drew the door to, after carefully ascertaining that the lock was a falling and not a spring one. In the latter case, they should have been a bad plight. Then he fumbled in his bag and, taking out a matchbox and a piece of candle, proceeded to make a light. The tomb in the daytime, and when wreathed with fresh flowers, had looked grim and gruesome enough, but now, some days afterwards, when the flowers hung lank and dead, their whites turning to rust and their greens to browns, when the spider and the beetle had resumed their accustomed dominance, and when the rusty, dank iron and tarnished brass gave back the feeble glimmer of a candle, the effect was more miserable and sordid than could have been imagined. Van Helsing went about his work systematically, holding his handle so that he could read the coffin plates, and so holding it that the sperm dropped in white patches which congealed as they touched the metal. He made assurance of Lucy's coffin. Another search in his bag, and he took out a turn screw. "What are you going to do?" Seward asked. "To open the coffin. You shall yet be convinced." Straight away he began taking out the screws, and finally lifted off the lid, showing the casing of lead beneath. To Seward it seemed to be too much, as much an affront to the dead as it would have been to have stripped off her clothing in her sleep while living. He actually took hold of the professor's hand to stop him. He only said, "You shall see." And taking the edge of the loose flange, he bent it back toward the foot of the coffin, and holding up the candle to the aperture, motioned to his companion to look. He drew near and looked. The coffin was empty. It was a considerable shock to him, but Van Helsing was unmoved. He was now more sure than ever of his ground, and so emboldened to proceed in his task. "Are you satisfied now, friend John?" he asked. "I am only satisfied that Lucy's body is not in that coffin." "But how can you account for it not being there?" "Perhaps a body snatcher," he suggested. "Some of the undertaker's people may have stolen it." He felt that he was speaking folly, and yet it was the only real cause which he could suggest. The professor sighed. "Ah, well," he said, "we must have more proof. Come with me." He put the coffin lid on again, gathered up his things, and placed them in the bag, blew out the light, and placed the candle also in the bag. He opened the door, and both went out. Behind them he closed the door and locked it. Then he took from his bag a packet, and from it pulled what looked like a thin, wafer-like biscuit, which was carefully rolled up in a white napkin. He asked Seward to give him his handkerchief, and wrapped the wafer inside it. Then, taking hold of Seward's arm, he tied the loose ends of the handkerchief around the wrist. With both hands in a firm hold on the doctor's arm, he said in all solemnity, "You must keep and protect this with your life." By now, Seward was too appalled at the whole business even to ask the professor what it was. Then the professor told him to watch at one side of the churchyard, while he would watch at the other. Seward took up his place behind a yew tree, and saw Van Helsing's dark figure move until the intervening headstones and trees hid it from sight. He was too cold and too sleepy to be keenly observant, and not sleepy enough to betray his trust, so altogether he was in for a dreary, miserable time. He was angry with the professor for taking him on such an errand, and with himself for coming. Just after his lonely vigil began, John heard a distant clock strike 1, and in time came 2. But when he heard the toll of 3, he was for some reason chilled and unnerved. He, who had up to an hour ago repudiated the proofs, felt his heart sink within him. Never did tombs look so ghastly white. Never did cypress or yew or juniper so seem the embodiment of funereal gloom. Never did tree or grass wave or rustle so ominously. Never did bough creak so mysteriously, and never did the faraway howling of dogs send such a woeful presage through the night. There was a long spell of silence, big, aching, void, and then from the professor a keen "sss." He pointed, and far down the avenue of yews they saw a white figure advance, a dim white figure, which held something dark at its breast. The figure stopped, and at the moment a ray of moonlight fell upon the masses of driving clouds and showed in startling prominence a dark-haired woman, dressed in the cerements of the grave. They could not see the face, for it was bent down over what appeared to be a fair-haired child. There was a pause, and a sharp little cry, such as a child gives in sleep, or a dog as it lies before the fire and dreams. Seward was starting forward, but the professor's warning hand kept him back. And then the white figure moved forwards again. It was now near enough for them to see clearly, and the moonlight still held. Seward's heart grew cold as ice, and he uttered a gasp as he recognized the features of Lucy Westenra. Lucy Westenra. But yet how changed. The sweetness was turned to adamantine, heartless cruelty, and the purity to voluptuous wantonness. Van Helsing raised his lantern and drew the slide. By the concentrated light that fell on Lucy's face, they could see that the lips were crimson with fresh blood, and that the stream had trickled over her chin and stained the purity of her lawn death robe. They both shuddered with horror. Even Van Helsing's iron nerve had failed. When the thing that bore the shape of Lucy saw them, she drew back with an angry snarl, such as a cat gives when taken unawares. Then her eyes ranged over them. Lucy's eyes in form and color, but Lucy's eyes unclean and full of hellfire instead of the pure, gentle orbs they knew. And at that moment, the remnant of Seward's love passed into hate and loathing. Had she then to be killed, he would have done it with savage delight. As she looked at him, her eyes blazed with unholy light, and the face became wreathed with a voluptuous smile. It made him shudder to see it. With a careless motion, she flung to the ground, callous as a devil, the child that up to now she had clutched strenuously to her breast, growling over it as a dog growls over a bone. The child gave a sharp cry and lay there moaning. There was a cold-bloodedness in the act which wrung a groan from Seward. When she advanced to him with outstretched arms and a wanton smile, he fell back and hid his face in his hands. She still advanced, however, and with a languorous, voluptuous grace said, "Come to me, John. My arms are hungry for you. Come, and we can rest together. Come, be my husband, come." There was something diabolically sweet in her tones, something of the tinkling of glass when struck, which rang through the brain. Seward seemed suddenly under a spell. Moving his hands from his face, he opened wide his arms. She was leaping for them, when suddenly she recoiled as if arrested by some irresistible force. Shown in the clear burst of moonlight was her distorted face, full of rage and baffled malice. The beautiful color became livid. The eyes seemed to throw out sparks of hellfire. The brows were wrinkled as though the folds of flesh were the coils of Medusa's snakes. And the lovely, blood-stained mouth grew to an open square, as in the passion masks of the Greeks and Japanese. If ever a face meant death, if looks could kill, they saw it at that moment. She turned as if to make for the entrance to her tomb. Van Helsing sprang forward and held before her his little golden crucifix, which again thwarted her advance. And so for full half a minute, which seemed an eternity, the sacred crucifix sealed her means of passage. Van Helsing broke the silence by asking Seward, Answer me, O my friend, am I to proceed in my work? Do as you will. Do as you will. There can be no horror like this ever any more. He groaned in spirit and looked on with horrified amazement as he saw, when Van Helsing stood back, the woman, with a corporeal body as real at that moment as their own, pass through the crevice between the door and its setting, where scarce a knife blade could have gone. In little more than an hour the dawn will break. She dare not leave her coffin again tonight, said Van Helsing. He reached for Seward's arm and untied the handkerchief, removing the wafer, then gently placed it in its packet and back into his bag. Then he went, and he lifted the child and said, As for this little one, he is not much harmed, and by tomorrow night he shall be well. Sorry guys, this is, I think, sitting on my ringtone, or my volume button, and so I have a weird thing at the top here. So let's play with that just a minute. There we go. Better. They took the child to the edge of Hampstead Heath. When they heard a policeman's heavy tramp, they laid the child on the pathway, then waited and watched until he saw it as he flashed his lantern to and fro. They heard his exclamation of astonishment, and then they went away silently. On the way back, Seward asked about the curious wafer, and was stopped in his tracks by the professor's reply. The host. I brought it from Amsterdam. I have dispensation. Then he stated as casually as if he were commenting on the weather. Seward fell silent in the presence of such earnest purpose, impossible to distrust, that the professor had so armed them with what was to him the most sacred of things. Sorry guys, there we go. As they approached the tomb, coming close to his friend, the professor said, John, you have had a sore trial, but after all, when you look back, you will see how it was necessary. You are now in the bitter waters, my friend. By this time tomorrow you will, please God, have passed them, and have drunk of the sweet waters. So do not mourn overmuch. Till then, I shall not ask you to forgive me. When they were certain they were alone, they silently proceeded to the tomb. The professor unlocked the door and they entered, closing it behind them. Then he took from his bag the lantern, which he lit, and also 2 wax candles which, when lighted, he stuck by melting their own ends onto other coffins, so that they might give light sufficient to work by. When he again lifted the lid off Lucy's coffin, they both looked, Seward trembling like an aspen, and saw that the corpse lay there in all its death beauty. But there was no love in her betrothed's heart, nothing but loathing for the foul thing which had taken Lucy's shape without her soul. His face grew hard as he looked. Presently he said to Van Helsing, Is this really Lucy's body, or only a demon in her shape? It is her body, and yet not it. But wait a while, and you shall see her as she was, and is. She seemed like a nightmare of Lucy as she lay there, the pointed teeth, the blood-stained voluptuous mouth, the whole carnal and unspirited appearance, seeming like a devilish mockery of Lucy's sweet purity. Van Helsing, with his usual methodicalness, began taking the various contents from his bag and placing them ready for use. First, he took out a soldering iron and some plumbing solder, and then a small oil lamp, then his operating knives, which he placed to hand, and last, a round wooden stake, some 2.5 or 3 inches thick and about 3 feet long. One end of it was hardened by charring in the fire and was sharpened to a fine point. With this stake came a heavy hammer, such as in households is used in the coal cellar for breaking the lumps. When all was ready, Van Helsing said, Before we do anything, let me tell you this. It is out of the lore and experience of the ancients, and of all those who have studied the powers of the undead. When they become Nosferatu, as they call it in Eastern Europe, there comes with the change the curse of immortality. They cannot die, but must go on age after age, adding new victims. For all that die from the preying of the undead become themselves undead and prey on their kind. And so the circle goes on ever widening, like the ripples from a stone thrown in the water. The career of this so unhappy dear lady is but just begun. But if this now undead be made to rest as true dead, then the soul of the poor lady whom we love shall again be free. Instead of working wickedness by night and growing more debased and the assimilating of it by day, she shall take her place with the other angels. So that, my friend, it will be a blessed hand for her that shall strike the blow that sets her free. To this I am willing, but it would not be a comfort to you, my friend, in future days when sleep is not, to think it was my hand that sent her to the stars. It was the hand of him that loved her best, the hand that of all she would herself have chosen, had it been hers to choose. Seward stepped forward. Van Helsing laid a hand on his shoulder and said, "Brave lad, a moment's courage and it is done. This stake must be driven through her. It will be a fearful ordeal, be not deceived in that. But you must not falter when once you have begun," said Seward hoarsely. "Tell me what I am to do." "Take this stake in your left hand, ready to place the point over the heart, and the hammer in your right. Then, when we begin our prayer for the dead, strike in God's name." Seward took the stake and the hammer. Van Helsing opened his missal and began to read. Seward rested the point over the heart, and then he struck with all his might. The thing in the coffin writhed, and a hideous blood-curdling screech came from the open red lips. The body shook and quivered and twisted in wild contortions. Sharp white teeth champed together till the lips were cut, and the mouth was smeared with the crimson foam. But Seward never faltered. He looked like a figure of Thor as his untrembling arm rose and fell, driving deeper and deeper the mercy-bearing stake, while the blood from the pierced heart welled and spurted up around it. And then the writhing and quivering of the body became less, and the teeth seemed to champ, and the face to quiver. Finally it lay still. The terrible task was over. The hammer fell from Seward's hand. He reeled and would have fallen had Van Helsing not caught him. The great drops of sweat sprang from his forehead, and his breath came in broken gasps. It had indeed been an awful strain on him, and had he not been forced to his task by more than human considerations, he could never have gone through with it. For a few moments, both were so taken up with him that they did not look towards the coffin. When they did, however, a murmur of startled surprise ran from one to the other. A great, glad, strange light broke over Seward's face and dispelled altogether the gloom of horror that lay upon it. There, in the coffin, lay no longer the foul thing that they had so dreaded and grown to hate, but Lucy as they had seen her in life, with her face of unequaled sweetness and purity. True that there were there, as they had seen them in life, the traces of care and pain and waste. But these were all dear to them, for they marked her truth to what they knew. They felt that the holy calm that lay like sunshine over the wasted face and form was only an earthly token and symbol of the calm that was to reign forever. Van Helsing came and laid his hand on Seward's shoulder and said to him, "And now, my friend, dear lad, am I not forgiven?" The reaction of the terrible strain came as Seward took the old man's hand in his, and raising it to his lips, pressed it and said, "Forgiven! God bless you that you have given my dear one her soul again, and me peace." He put his hands on the professor's shoulder, and laying his head on his breast, cried for a while silently, while both stood unmoving. When he raised his head, Van Helsing said to him, "And now, my child, you may kiss her. Kiss her dead lips if you will, as she would have you to, if for her to choose. For she is not a grinning devil now, not any more a foul thing for all eternity. She is God's true dead, whose soul is with him. Seward bent and kissed her, and then the professor sent him out of the tomb that he might be spared the final procedure, which would be made hard now that she had none of the malign in her appearance. He sawed the top off of the steak, leaving the point of it in the body. Then he cut off the head and filled the mouth with garlic. He soldered up the leaden coffin, screwed on the coffin lid, and gathered up his belongings, came away. When the professor locked the door, he gave the key to Seward. Outside the air was sweet, the sun was rising, and the birds sang, and it seemed as if all nature were tuned to a different pitch. There was gladness and mirth and peace everywhere, for the two men were at rest themselves on one account, and they were glad, though it was with a tempered joy. It looks like Cliff is here. Hello, Cliff. I'm glad you're here with us. So now we move on to part 3. Van Helsing was off to the British Museum, looking up some authorities on ancient medicine, searching for witch and demon cures which might be useful to him. You cannot cure a witch. We're not broken. Sometimes Seward thought that they must all be mad, and that they should wake in straight waistcoats. Then from the wings would enter Renfield to dispense the rational wisdom that would restore them all to sanity. I know you're not really here, Cliff. I know, it's mirage. Somebody's hacked into your Facebook, and they're pretending to be you, but they're watching this, so we're glad. Seward was making his rounds when he was surprised by Mina's voice behind him. Dr. Seward, may I ask a favor? I want to see your patient, Mr. Renfield. She had returned unannounced. He was slightly thrown by her direct manner. He quickly deemed this the best way, and possibly the only way, to resolve the issue in her mind, and so he consented. When he went into the room, he told the man that a lady would like to see him, to which the patient simply answered, Why? She is going through the house and wants to see everyone in it. Oh, very well, he said. Let her come in, but by all means, but just wait a minute till I tidy up the place. Oh, God, okay, here we go. His method of tidying was to simply swallow all the flies and spiders in the boxes before Seward could stop him. It was quite evident that he feared or was jealous of some interference. When he had got through his disgusting task, he said cheerfully, Let the lady come in, and sat down on the edge of his bed with his head down, but with his eyelids raised so that he could see her as she entered. For a moment, the doctor thought that he might have some homicidal intent, and took care to stand where he could seize him at once if he attempted to make a spring at her. She came into the room with an easy gracefulness, which would at once command the respect of any lunatic. For easiness is one of the qualities mad people most respect. She walked over to him, smiling pleasantly, and held out her hand. Good evening, Mr. Renfield, said she. You see, I know you, for Dr. Seward has told me of you. He made no immediate reply, but eyed her all over intently with a set frown on his face. This look gave way to one of wonder, which merged in doubt. Then to Seward's intense astonishment, he said, You're not the girl the doctor wanted to marry, are you? You can't be, you know, for she's dead. Cliff says you can't cure a witch, but you can cure a ham. I hate you, Cliff. I hate you so, so much. And I miss saying that to your face. Anyway. Mina smiled sweetly. She replied, Oh, no. I have a husband of my own, to whom I was married before I ever saw Dr. Seward, or he me. I am Mrs. Harker. And what are you doing here? My husband and I are staying on a visit with Dr. Seward. Then don't stay. But why not? Seward thought that this style of conversation might not be pleasant to Mrs. Harker, any more than it was to him, so he joined in. How did you know I wanted to marry anyone? Renfield's reply was simply contemptuous, given in a pause in which he turned his eyes from Mina to Seward, instantly turning them back again. What an asinine question! I don't see that at all, Mr. Renfield, said Mina. He replied to her with as much courtesy and respect as he had shown contempt to Seward. You will, of course, understand, Mrs. Harker, that when a man is so loved and honored as our host is, everything regarding him is of interest in our little community. Dr. Seward is loved not only by his household and his friends, but even by his patients, who, being some of them hardly in mental equilibrium, are apt to distort causes and effects. Since I myself have been an inmate of a lunatic asylum, I cannot but notice that the sophistic tendencies of some of its inmates lean toward the errors of non-causa and ignoratio elench. Seward positively opened his eyes at this new development. Here was his own pet lunatic, the most pronounced of his type that he'd ever met with, talking elemental philosophy and with the manner of a polished gentleman. It was hard to imagine that he had seen him eat up his spiders and flies not 5 minutes before. He wondered if it was Mrs. Harker's presence which had touched some chord in his memory. They continued to make small talk for some time. Looking at his watch, the doctor saw that he should go to the station to meet Van Helsing, so he told Mrs. Harker that it was time to leave. She came at once, after saying pleasantly to Mr. Renfield, "Goodbye, and I hope I may see you again, under auspices pleasanter to yourself." To which, to Seward's astonishment, he replied, "Goodbye, my dear. I pray God that I may never see your sweet face again. May he bless and keep you." Back within the study, Mina let fall the mask of composure and gently collapsed into the upholstered chair. "Is that the man you believed to be Mr. Harker?" asked Seward, as he seated himself across from her. "It is him, and it is not him," said she, quavering. "The face and figure and voice are his, but the person I spoke with in that room is a stranger to me." Before Seward could react to this, she pulled from her purse a typed manuscript, which she placed on his desk. "This is the transcript of Mr. Renfield's diary." And placing her hand to her temple, "Dr. Seward, you will excuse me, I must lie down." Seward rose, but she had already left the study. "Alas, how that dear woman must have suffered as she read her husband's terrible account," said the professor. "Oh, Madam Mina, how can I say what I owe to her? This paper is sunshine. It opens the gate to me." He stopped. His voice was breaking, and Seward did not know if rage or terror predominated in his own heart. There was no need to put their fear, nay, their conviction, into words. They shared them in common. For more than an hour, Seward and Van Helsing had been studying and analyzing the bundle of papers typed by Mina. In fearful detail, the horror which Jonathan Harker had lived through was brought before them, as it had been before Mina, like the slow unveiling of a hideous painting. "What is here told," the professor laid his hand heavily and gravely on the packet of papers as he spoke, "may foretell the beginning of the end to you and me and many another, or it may sound the knell of the undead who walk upon the earth, for is not information the greatest weapon?" Now, they knew that it was this Count Dracula who killed Lucy, attacking her first in her own home, then here at the asylum, that the house which Dracula had bought, and was his hiding place, was the one next door to the very one in which they now sat, and that in this very building, the moods and behavior of one of its own patients were powerfully connected to the doings of the Count. Could it be that the vulnerability of the monster might be carried to Renfield in some subtle way? If they could only get some hint as to what passed in his mind. The patient had been seemingly quiet for some time. Was he? That wild yell seemed to come from his room. The attendant came bursting into the doctor's study and announced that Renfield had somehow met with some accident. He had heard him yell, and when he went to him, found him lying on his face on the floor, all covered in blood. Seward looked to Van Helsing, who gave him a nod, and he hurried to the patient's room. There, Seward found him lying on the floor on his left side in a pool of blood. When he went to move him, it became at once apparent that he had received some terrible injuries. There seemed none of the unity of purpose between the parts of the body which marks even lethargic sanity. As the face was exposed, he could see that it was horribly bruised, as though it had been beaten against the floor. The attendant who was kneeling beside the body said to Seward as they turned him over, "I think, sir, his back is broken. See, both his right arm and leg and the whole side of his face are paralyzed." The attendant seemed quite bewildered. "I can't understand the two things. He could mark his face like that by beating his own head on the floor. I saw a young woman do it once at the Eversfield Asylum before anyone could lay hands on her. And I suppose he might have broken his neck by falling out of bed if he got in an awkward kink. But for the life of me, I can't imagine how the two things occurred at once." Seward said to him, "Go to Dr. Van Helsing and ask him to kindly come here at once." The man ran off and found the professor already on his way, bearing with him his surgical case. Seward sent the attendant off to his round, and they went into a strict examination of the patient. The wounds of the face were superficial. The real injury was a depressed fracture of the skull, extending right up through the motor area. The professor thought a moment and said, "The rapidity of the suffusion shows the terrible nature of his injury. The whole motor area seems affected. The suffusion of the brain will increase quickly. There's no use. His time is short." Each instant the poor man seemed as though he would open his eyes and speak, but then would follow a prolonged stertorous breath. For a few moments the breathing continued to be stertorous. There was a nervous suspense over them, as though overhead some dread bell would peal out powerfully when they should least expect it. Then there came a breath so prolonged that it seemed as though it would tear open his chest. Suddenly, his eyes opened and became fixed in a wild, helpless stare. This continued for a few moments. Then it was softened into a glad surprise, and from his lips came a sigh of relief. He moved convulsively, and as he did so, said, "I'll be quiet, doctor. Tell them to take off the strait waistcoat. I have had a terrible dream, and it has left me so weak that I cannot move. What's wrong with my face? It feels all swollen, and it smarts dreadfully." He tried to turn his head, but even with the effort his eyes seemed to grow glassy again, so Seward gently put it back. Then Van Helsing said in a grave tone, "Tell us your dream, Mr. Renfield." As he heard the voice, his face brightened through its mutilation, and he said, "That is Dr. Van Helsing. How good it is of you to be here. Give me some water. My lips are dry, and I shall try to tell you. I dreamed—" He stopped and seemed fainting. Seward hurried to his study and returned with a glass, a decanter of brandy, and a carafe of water. They moistened the parched lips, and the patient quickly revived. He looked up at Seward piercingly with an agonized confusion and said, "I must not deceive myself. It was no dream, but all a grim reality." Then his eyes roved around the room. For an instant his eyes closed, not with pain or sleep, but voluntarily, as though he were bringing all his faculties to bear. When he opened them, he said, hurriedly, and with more energy than he had yet displayed. "Quick, doctor, quick, I am dying. I feel that I have but a few minutes, and then I must go back to death, or worse. Wet my lips with brandy again. I have something that I must say before I die, or before my crushed brain dies anyhow. Thank you." As he spoke, Van Helsing's eyes never blinked, but his hand came out and met Seward's and gripped it hard. He did not, however, betray himself. He nodded slightly and said, "Go on," in a low voice. And that's where we will leave it today, kids. I think we're going to get on tomorrow. If you guys are free, please hang out with me. I'm not sure of the exact time yet, but I will create an event. I will make sure I invite you guys. I want to keep going with this, but I know Instagram limits me to an hour. Anyhow, so we will leave that here for today. We'll pick it up tomorrow, and we'll just see what Renfield has to say. So enjoy your evening, guys. It is cold and windy and definitely fall in Indiana. So, we may end up picking this back up again tonight. I don't know. But I'm hoping tomorrow all my fire startings will have dried out enough that we can be outside, possibly with a fire and not just smoke. So, I love you guys. I will see you tomorrow. Have a great evening. Bye.